Bam.
This is Erik Kleinsmith, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
For those that don't know, Eric and I used to be in the army together, and he was my commander in Bosnia, and he commanded a company of spies. That is a no shit fact right there. He was the guy that came in when we were there, and it's interesting. And we'll talk about this in another episode. But our battalion, specifically our company in our battalion, really was the spearhead for the whole Bosnia effort at the dawn of the digital age in human collection. So that's kind of an interesting topic. We will talk about that another time. But that's who Eric is. Eric is super notable for a number of things. He had his finger on the 9/11 attackers before 9/11. He testified in Congress because of that, and they wanted to know what the heck happened. He also is part of a team called the Case Breakers, and they go out and they look at cold cases, especially particularly famous ones. Like they figured out who D.B. Cooper was. They've solved who the Zodiac killer is. This guy named Gary Poste, and they're working on Hoffa, and they're working on all these different things. And I guess today, at some point, we're going to talk about Ukraine. But I wanted to just briefly, I want to talk a little bit about Case Breakers, Eric, for a minute or two, just to kind of give us all an update, because everybody's desperate for more, but it's hard to get more out because these things move at their own pace.
Yeah, it's a slow. I mean, it's a slow slog, and when you get into some of these, like the cases that we're doing, these are the holy grails of cold cases. I mean, we have several team members that are working on a lot of local cases. I mean, there's 1,800 cold cases, or cases that go cold per year. And when we first started gaining a little bit of notoriety, we were getting lots and lots of what I gotta say, very depressing emails of, "Will you please help me find the murderer of my son? Will you please?" Very personal. Lots of folks that are very frustrated. And bottom line is law enforcement does not have the resources to solve every case. If only when you get to a police state are we able to do. Are they able to even get close to covering down? So you have to commit your resources to what can be solved. And if it just goes cold, it goes cold. It gets put in a different file. A different team takes a look at it, and that, good Lord, the ones we're dealing with now, we're measuring the time in decades, 40, 50 years. These are no longer cold cases that were the ones we're doing. These are historical cases more than anything else.
Right. That reality, I mean, it's there. And then sometimes sometimes the system can't reliably prove that somebody did something, even like Tupac Shakur's murder. Right. The government's never going to solve that. Maybe some detective will put together a package of data and be like, it's most likely this guy,
right?
But that's never going to court. You're never going to be able to prove the case, right? And so when you're a prosecutor, you're like, hey, quit looking at Tupac Shakur,
right?
We can't put resources into that,
Right. That's what we're running into. Good Lord, ran into it with Cooper. We're running into it now with Gary Poste and the Zodiac killer, where it's, look, it's like, and you gotta feel for the San Francisco police, the Riverside Police Department.
Sure.
There's some smaller sheriff's offices out in the middle of the state, where Gary Poste grew up and where he's from. And quite honestly, it's like, look, I could answer all your requests. I could, get into this with you, but I'm spending time and resources that I'm not spending then on something more recent. And quite frankly, that's something that actually can do some good in the world. So you really have to do, I hate to say it, but you're prioritizing your morals on what can be solved. Can I go after this guy, Cooper, who didn't kill anybody? He only stole $250,000, pulled off a terrorism hijacking for $250,000. And then we think he died a couple of years ago. Why in the hell do I want to spend resources on that when, especially like the Bureau, when the guys we were dealing with in the Bureau, the same team that was in charge of the missing and exploited children. Do you want to go after some old fart? Do you want to go after to help the family of a child that's actively missing right now, or is only 3 or 4 years? You could actually do some good and save a life.
It's a great point. And just to illustrate it even more, Vallejo is where the Zodiac operated in, which is next door to my hometown. That's why I know about a lot of this stuff.
Right.
And it's a town of, let's call it 120,000 people. Not a huge place, but it's a place that in the 2000s had a lady abducted and raped and they went on TV, national TV, and said, "Hoax! This lady's a liar."
Yeah.
And then got sued for $2 million, right?
Yeah.
This is a place that lawlessness is a fairly normal thing. There are shootings all the time and all kinds of problems to deal with. And we're talking about stuff from the 60s when it comes to the Zodiac, right?
Yeah.
So they're not going to give you much time. It's not a small town force, but it's stretched beyond its limit. You know, sheriff helps cover down on their mission. That's how short staffed they are.
Yeah. I mean, do we want to actively solve crimes, or do we want to help participate in the History Channel or or whatever, and some documentary that, big deal for them, so there's, you run it. It's a little bit of overwhelming piece, but then it's also why do I want to expose, the embarrassment of a previous generation's group of investigators who were never really able to solve this crime.
Right.
Where do you, it's like, I can't remember what show it's from. I think it's George Costanza from Seinfeld. It's like, where do you get the gall, to think that you can be better than than these past investigators who have quite frankly destroyed their own lives in some cases.
Oh my gosh, divorces, drug abuse and everything.
Alcoholism. It was just, these things can eat you up. And I guess the one that's really hardest to work, of the 4 cases that we're working, I mean, the Zodiac and Cooper and the Hoffa, and I grew up outside of Detroit. I mean, when Hoffa went missing, they went to my dad was a middle school principal or assistant principal at the time, and they went to his middle school and they made all the teachers open up the cars in their parking lot because they got a tip off that Hoffa was in one of the trunks of one of the cars. I mean, that's how close the Hoffa was to me. I mean, I was in the area when it was going. That's all anybody talked about then. Even as a kid, I still, as 9 years older, I still remember all that. And so it's, but the one that really bothers me the most, and the one to work on is the one we're doing on it. We received a tip off about the Atlanta child murders, and that one is just, you get done working with it, and it just drains the energy out of you. It's just really sad. You've got 26 young African male adults to children who were murdered over several months, actually over a year time frame, but they've only really could solve 2 of those 26 cases. That means you got 24 families who, when authorities say they got their guy Walter Williams, and they threw him in Wayne Williams, they threw him in jail, and he's still there. He's calling into the family support group saying, "Look, I didn't do it," while he's serving life for 2 of the murders. And they only got him on forensic evidence. They got some fibers off of the two of the children that were thrown into the Chattahoochee River, and they could trace it back to his vehicle. That was the forensic evidence that got him. But the thing is, like, okay, so that's 2 of them. What about the other 24? So we're receiving tip-offs about the other 24, to include these 2 murders, and it just confounds me. And why would? Okay, we think we got this guy for 2. Let's close the books, close the shops, shut everything down, and say we got our guy. Right. Good. We're good to go. And, and now that the more and more we get information coming in, we got a lot of folks that are volunteering information. Again, 40 plus years later, it's just gotten downright disturbing. I wish I could go into the details with you this one, but this one is the best thing I can tell is, like, we actually have a no kidding live witness who has disappeared over the past month, and we're looking for him. I mean, that's we have an active search out for one of the individuals involved who we did find and interviewed, and then he disappeared the next day. So it's just some strange stuff that, but again, it's just, oh God, it's just horrible to have to go through have to relive the pain that all these families are living day to day.
I want to go back to, we talked about the size of Vallejo, and back in the late 60s, Vallejo, it was a military town, so it was always a little bit bigger, but it still wasn't a big place. And so if it was half as big, 60,000 people, and if you're the chief of police and you're talking to Betty Lou Jensen's parents and David Faraday's parents, and then a couple months later, Darlene Ferrin is murdered out in the same, within a mile of each other. These people are like, when you hear the story, Blue Rock Springs versus Lake Herman Road, you don't attach the fact that it is the next turn. and down the road. They're each about a mile from each other on the road. It is no distance at all.
Right.
And you're a Vallejo PD guy, and you're like, I cannot figure out who did this, or I can't put this. You're desperate to solve this. These are young kids. You know, when David and Betty Lee were out in the back of a car, you know, they're just gonna, you know, kiss and squeeze some boobs and, you know, just do high school kids stuff. They're not looking to get murdered, you know.
Right.
And so the cops, oh my God, it's horrible for them. And they at this age, these guys are taking it to their graves, like that they never were able to solve this thing. And if not for you guys, you know, one thing that's amazing to me, and I recognize it now, is all of these trade shows that are built up around these cases, and how much they don't want you guys to have Gary Poste be the Zodiac killer. They don't want closure on these things.
No.
They don't want Rackstraw to be DB Cooper, because they have a living with it not being Rackstraw. And so there's this whole counter narrative on top of it. So there's these people that say you don't have any evidence. There's these people that are like, oh, that's my business, leave my business alone. All these other things, as you guys are just trying to help solve these things, that you have the time and inclination to go, and better tools now. I mean, DNA might solve a lot of these cases.
Right. I mean, we were disinvited to CooperCon, which was the 50th anniversary last year. And it was for one primary reason, is that one of the guests that they had, which was a child at the time, he's an adult now, but he was a kid who found the money buried next to the river when he was out on a picnic with his parents. We had additional information that money was planted there, so in order to throw the investigators off the tail. Well, this then kid, now this guy, does not want a group coming in to say, hey, this guy's parents were probably in on it. We got a piece of information or evidence that their parents were tipped off to have them look there to find this money. Well, and then as you know, if this guy's saying, look, if these guys show up, I'm not coming to your conference to speak. Well, that's, you know, one strike against us. But then again, your entire business model is based upon not solving this case. In reality, I mean, you want folks to come in and discuss it and go to the hotel and spend money and buy merchandise and everything else, but that in itself becomes an industry and becomes, you know, a source of revenue. Why would you want to bring in a group that says, all right, you know what, we've solved it, you don't need to have these anymore?
Right. You don't need these anymore. Yeah.
Exactly.
Go find a new thing. There's a couple other things I want to talk about here with case breakers. Then I want to move on to Ukraine and everything else. One of the common objections, and I don't mind the objections, because this is where the rigor comes in, right? Like, you guys need to be able to withstand this.
Right.
They say you don't have any evidence, or they say it's all circumstantial evidence. And I don't know that we all agree on what those words mean. Yeah. But what's your basic response to, you guys don't have any evidence? And then also, can you also circle back on, why not just walk up the hill to where the weapons cache is and grab that pistol?
Right. Well, part of the trouble is it all that costs money. I mean, to get up, this to this mountain to where it is, we have to go up with the family member who knows where it is. It's that kind of, you know, and you just can't, you know, to be able to get the assets. We're doing everything on a shoestring budget, so we don't have the power of an entire network behind us until we land a documentary and they said, hey, we'll spend the resources to do that. This is an all volunteer operation. It's run by a guy who's been a great friend of mine, you know, and I consider him a great friend for the past 12 plus years. Tom Colbert, who's lives out in California, and he's pretty much staked, you know, his entire reason for being on working some of these cases, and not only he's got these like I said, these marquee or cold case, these holy grail cases, but he's really looking to build a structure through a nonprofit to put together cold case teams in every state. I mean, we've got Jennifer Buchholz, who's she's a great member of our team. I brought her into our case breakers when she essentially brought us the source for the Zodiac killer. But she works cases on her own, and you've interviewed her before. She's a former Army counterintelligence agent, knows you from there. But she's working some smaller cases on her own. She's solved a case in Arkansas of a long forgotten murder. Now she's working on one in Lubbock, Texas, and That's been an issue because they were disinvited from CrimeCon, which is a massive convention that's held in Vegas every year. They just said, look, the folks that are involved with that case said if you show up and if you talk about this case, they're going to sue. Even though it's been years and years and years after the fact. But we've discovered that you can use the model of, you've got folks who are former this and former investigators and former there's only two really intel folks. It's myself and Jennifer that are working this, but we're putting in some really new techniques to help solve these. One of which is use of data mining tools, and the other one is the use of crowdsourcing. And Jennifer has been very successful at using crowdsourcing and soliciting. Now when you do crowdsourcing, you get a whole lot of garbage and you get a whole lot of speculations and everything else. But it turns out that the guy that she had fingered for this murder in Arkansas actually joined the Facebook group because he wanted to monitor what was going on. And it just, the stuff that he was mentioning or keeping tabs on just didn't jive. And so that's when things started getting close, that she was watching the patterns of his reactions and that kind of thing. So it's just, you're using some new techniques, but none of these cases can be solved without A, resources to put at them, and B, without what I call a spark or a new piece of evidence that points to one particular answer or one hypothesis, is that like this is the guy. And that's when all four of the cases that we're working is somebody came to us, presented us with this one piece of evidence, and we just started reverse engineering it and saying, look, we'll just let's check and see if this is the guy. And all four cases, I'll take that back. In three of the cases, the Hoffa case, we think we have a location. We've actually suited up some guys to make them look like city employees so they could put a ground penetrating radar on the site. And sure enough, hey, there's disturbed dirt under where you're looking. The problem is it's paved over and it's not in the location that Fox Nation is covering the junkyard with the buried drums in New Jersey. That's not the location that that we're investigating.
That's not that location. It's probably
right, exactly. And the thing is, our story is deep enough and it's got enough evidence in it that if the body is not there, it's probably because it was removed during construction and somebody either carelessly just threw it away with a bunch of junk they dug up, or just somebody said, hey, time to move it again, or whatever. But at least we have a place that he probably was or still is that we're looking at. So, but again, it's like until you get somebody that comes and gives you that spark that says, I've got a piece of evidence, I think this is the guy. And with Zodiac, the key piece was, I got a piece of evidence, I got a guy who's a family member that says he's the guy. And then we found a second piece that right on the tail end of that was brought to us by an investigative reporter that said, oh, by the way, I've been told the key to breaking all the Zodiac letters and the Zodiac codes is the guy's actual name. And when you plug that in as the actual name, these letters just fall into place with, and our code breakers, first when we sent that information over to our code breaker on our team, he came back to us and he goes, I can solve every one of these in about 6 months. He goes, I can validate right there. And that's almost, in terms of cryptological, that's like having a DNA match for getting the key to break a certain code. You're up into the millions and millions of possibilities like that. We're now, and then we are at the point where we're now looking at DNA for the Zodiac killer. And so, and I know I'm jumping from case to case, but all this stuff is just, there's so much out there to do, but it's all volunteer work. We're not working off of a budget of any sort. There's folks that are taking their own time, their own vacations, even their own travel to go to go look at this.
I think it's important to also mention too, like in terms of going to get the weapons cache, the Zodiac with the pistols.
Yeah.
You know the story of Jones's Gold in Huachuca, Eric? You know that story?
No.
Oh, this is great. This is a great story. So in I'm going to say the 40s, 50s, there was this guy at Huachuca, and he, realizes there's a hole, looks down on the hole, and it's got a billion pounds of gold in it. Like it's a treasure trove of actual, this is processed gold, right? This is a stash.
Okay.
And so the legend is that he grabs a piece of it, throws a big party for all his friends, and he marks where it is up in Huachuca Canyon.
Right.
And then he can never find it again. Right. So he knows exactly where it is.
Right.
And Post commanders, all these guys provisioned trying to find this thing. It was a really
Yeah.
neat story. They wanted to, and they were never able. So we don't know if it was a hoax or not, but
Yeah.
there are plenty of people like, no, I remember the day he had it. He had a big hunk of
Yeah.
gold, you know.
Right. Right.
So all these things, so you run out of the ability. Like some commanders, like that's it. We're never looking again. It's done, and we're not
Yeah.
going to spend. But it's millions of dollars to do these things. So if your guy walks up into the hills, one, does the sheriff department want to be involved in this because there's a chain of custody thing? Two, how do you get 20 plus people on the side of a mountain somewhere? People don't understand how rugged this is. Not gentle mountains like the Appalachians. These Sierra is rugged as it gets.
Yeah.
And then you have the other thing of what if he's 25 feet or 2 miles to the left of where it actually is, because it was 50 years ago, you know?
Right.
These are not simple things to solve.
Yeah, and that's the thing is it's one those become, you know, why do folks continually go after that? Why? Because, you know, just for the thrill of it. I mean, the thrill of the search is as exciting as to some folks as actually finding it. You know, and that's. But the problem is for law enforcement, it's not at all. I mean, it's you know, I can't tell you how many times we've essentially gotten the answer of, we'll help you solve this crime when you come to us and tell us you've solved the crime.
Right.
You know, and that's really what it's come down to. It's like, give us no kid. I mean, even the FBI, it's like, you give us a piece of the parachute and we'll pay attention to it. Well, we sent guys up into the wilderness and they found 2 pieces of a parachute.
Right.
And we handed it to them, and we handed them DNA, and we handed them like 1,800 other pieces of evidence.
Yes.
And then they closed the case and said, we're not working this. So, you know, that's not, you know, I can't, you know, I have friends in law enforcement. I mean, I got friends in the California Department of Justice I really respect. And, you know, I can see it from their side where it's just like, golly, you know, I don't need this headache. There's always those emails that we call them MEGA emails that go around. It's like some boss sends it down to some department and says, make it go away, you know, and do what you need to do. And that's what public affairs guys do. That their primary job is to make problems go away. And every time somebody comes up with a new theory on the investigation, it's like, we are not spending resources to do this unless they can actually, you know, and that's the thing is, find me a body, drag it in front of my desk, and then I'll help you solve the crime.
Yeah.
So,
the Tim Hennis case comes to mind when we talk about, you know, what should happen versus what's possible. Tim Hennis is accused of killing a wife and a couple of girls. It's a military case. And so not once, not twice, but 3 times this guy was tried for the crime. 3 times. Wow. So one of the times mistrial because they put a bunch of images above his head of the victims. And so like mistrial. So they tried it again, not convicted. And then the military court brought him in. Under the mother's fingernails is DNA, and they won't test it. Like this is absolutely,
that baffles me.
Yeah, and this is not an expensive thing. I get it that you don't have a budget for it this year, but you might have an innocent person in jail, or you can confirm, no, that's Tim Hennis's DNA. He needs to be in jail for the rest of his life, but they won't do it, right? And so this is the thing you have to battle is like, whatever reason, whatever hold up, no one wants to get egg on there, whatever it is.
I think that's part of it.
Yeah, and none of these things are as direct as we want them to be when it comes to solving these cold cases. And so bless you guys for trying to figure these things out, because there's the other thing is by you guys existing walk-ins, and I'm positive that this is true. You haven't told me this before, but I'm positive it's true. You'll have a walk-in come in and say, hey, I think I know who the Zodiac killer was. And you're like, well, why didn't you bring this up before? I did. And then
you know, and the part of it is, you know, I'm learning more about how investigations work with different levels of departments from federal to local than I am about cases. You know, you have to learn more about the environment that you're working in, the bureaucracy, the different levels of bureaucracy that you have to navigate. You know, our initial tip-off was investigative reporter named Dale Julin. And in fact, he was just hosting our previous the Casebreakers.org podcast. He was the host of that. And so he had gone to the FBI when he was working out in California. But the problem is his approach was wrong. And what I mean by that is that he thought that if he showed up to an FBI field office and waited in the waiting room, that somebody would hear him out. And
Yeah.
the first thing, the mentality of any kind of law enforcement place is, who's the nut that's sitting out front? It doesn't matter whether we think he's right or wrong. Is make him go away. That's and then again, you start your approach off, a certain way, and you find out, like, God darn it, how do I get buy-in with these guys? And that's really what we're struggling with now, is how do we get buy-in to these police departments, whether it's Vallejo or Riverside or whatever. It's like, we're not there to embarrass them, but there's that culture of protection that is always up. It's like, look, we actually want you guys to solve this. We actually want you guys to be the heroes, because you did put in, quite honestly, over the years, 90% of the work. We're just doing, the 10%. We want you. We want to be supportive, and that's, we're now in the age where you've got tons and tons. I mean, CrimeCon gets thousands of attendees, and they even advertise. What's amazing is that I think the folks who attend CrimeCon, it's 83% or something like that is female, and the average age is 40, and the average household income is $170,000 a year.
Wow.
So you have a demographic, and it's spouses, whether they're working, they're in the industry, they're working from home, or they're on a second job, or they're done raising kids and they're looking for, but you have a whole swath of folks who, thanks to this cool thing called the internet, can now get involved, can get more deeply, into the case, can start sharing, and that's, we talk about diversity all the time. And what we're missing in a lot of the political discussion about diversity is the most important piece. It's the diversity of thought.
Yeah.
It was a housewife that solved the first Zodiac cipher because they published it in the paper, and she's looking at it and says, "This is easy." It's somebody who just comes from a different walk of life. You want them on your team to give a different perspective, and it doesn't have to do anything to do with race or anything else, but the backgrounds and the way they think. And I'd rather match somebody up from that's an American from the West, somebody from the East, and then throw in somebody from another country even that has a different way of thinking and different way of doing analysis. That's the kind of if you only can work with a small team, that's the kind of diversity you want on your team.
I love it. I want to talk about case pickers the whole show, but let's
I know.
do that. We'll come back and do
well,
it.
You know what? There's going to be updates. I mean, I can tell you, we're actively working a lot of it, and we're down to looking at shell casings. We are looking at DNA. It's a slow trog through those, because you got to get folks who will volunteer their time within and labs that will sign up and say, look, we have a new technology we want you to try. So we're doing. We are breaking a lot of new ground on some of these cases with some very experimental stuff, but so there will always be more stuff to come out. And like I said, there's, the DB Cooper series comes out on a streaming service in August. It'll be a 5-part series. Can't mention which streaming service it is, but it's obviously well known. And then we're still working on, trying to solidify the Zodiac, Hoffa, and the Atlanta child murders for other docs.
It's crazy. Those are like some of the biggest cases in history. Oh, and by the way, CrimeCon, where no crimes ever get solved.
Well, I mean, it's a great thing that they're doing. I just wish they would have given Jen and our team a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, that we're there not to be disruptors or not to cause problems. We are there to actively support the group and support the organizers and all that. I mean, it's just disappointing.
Yeah. So let me just say this right into the camera. Hey, everybody, if you want to support the Break It Down show, gosh, it would be great if you did that. Go to breakitdownshow.com, click on the PayPal link. That's the most direct way. That money goes right into my pocket, and then I put that right back into the show. I don't need Patreon. I need you, I need me, and then we'll work it out. $5 a month goes a long way. $25, it goes even further. Or if you just like, hey, Pete, here's $100. Fill 2/3 of a tank of gas.
Fill your lawnmower.
Go out on the road and go get me an incredible story. Hey, Pete, I want to go with you on one of these stories. Throw some money in the bank. Call me up. We'll do it. Get a hold of me at peter@breakitdownshow.com. Tell me what you want me to do. And my job is to try to find these stories. So definitely do that. Or look, I make shirts all the time. This one says Res Publica. That means our thing in Latin. go to buy a shirt at the bonfire shop. Super easy. This is how you support the show. I'm independent. I can do what I want, but you all got to help me with a little bit of financing so that I can continue to do bigger and greater things. I'm only really limited by money. I've got time. Just got to have money to fill my tank full of gas. All right. So with that said, you guys also have this great new podcast. Everybody should go to casebreakers.org and you can look at all kinds of stuff there about the case breakers. Yeah. And if you have questions like, you don't got no data, I promise they do. Go there, start there, watch the shows that they've produced, watch the shows that we produce. Okay. There is a war in Europe right now. It is and I'm not talking about the continued Balkan conflict that seems to never ever want to stop. We're talking about Ukraine versus Russia. We've talked to a lot of different people about this fight, including a Finnish colonel talking about the Finn point of view and how they view all this conflict. What are your thoughts in general, and especially now that we're well into this thing and it has not gone Russia's way?
Right. Well, I tell you, that's as a former Army intel officer, that's that came into the Army in the late 80s and was in Europe. I was a infantry battalion tactical intel officer. I was a brigade. I was the intel officer for 1st of the 6th Infantry in Vilsec, and then I went to be the 3rd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division. That's all we studied was Soviet way of warfare. And you're seeing it play out again and again. And then I actually trained in Ukraine in the mid 90s with the Ukrainian Army, the 7th Motorized Rifle Regiment of the 24th Motorized Rifle Division, Ukrainian. And so I had firsthand accounts it's the training area outside of Lviv that was recently bombed, and they're using it for refugee staging area and everything. But we had partnered our unit up with this Ukrainian division and Ukrainian regiment through what the military and what NATO was calling the Partnership for Peace initiative. And what that was is after the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, it was a way to train with and get firsthand evaluations of these different countries. Poland was one. In fact, Russia was one, to see if these countries were, I guess you can say, worthy or worth consideration for eventual inclusion into either EU or into NATO. So this was, again, 4 years after the breakup of the Soviet Union. So we got a real firsthand account with how the Ukrainians fought, aka the Soviet way of war. And again, as we had been studying for such a long time. I have an axe on the wall behind me. It's a wooden one, and it just says "For long memory from Ukrainian friend," and that was given to me by the reconnaissance officer of the 7th Motorized Rifle Regiment. We were exchanging gifts. I think I gave him a bolo tie from Arizona, which was the coolest thing ever in the 90s. So, yeah. But one of the things that when you look at this invasion and what's going on is it was so many things were ringing bells with me, and so many things were striking true with analysis and the amount of study that we had done. And the first thing, the biggest thing that I'm looking at was that, the Russians had two objectives that they had to perform in the initial phases of the war. And one was to completely overwhelm the Ukrainian defense forces within a very short time, before the logistics became an issue, before the any kind of humanitarian crisis became an issue. But the second thing, and a lot of the folks who do analysis on this, they kind of bypass this. But the second thing that they had to do is, you got to remember that the entire world has been watching the Americans fight for 20 plus years, 30 plus if you're talking about the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War, and then invasion of Afghanistan. So, and quite honestly, it's especially the first Gulf War. We were able to reduce the world's 5th largest army of Saddam Hussein down to next to nothing. And we lost less soldiers and airmen and Marines than we lost at the Alamo in the process of doing that. And why? It's because of our tactics, techniques, and our technology. And then there's one piece, and I'll get to this in a second, that's obviously the most important piece, and that's that the United States fights quite differently than almost every other force on the planet. And it's because we have an extremely strong NCO Corps. And that is the small unit leadership is one of the most crucial pieces that you don't hear or you don't see that a lot of these other a lot of these other armies are able to fight. And here's examples. I just read this morning that an 8th general, major general above on the Russian forces has been killed. Why? It's because these guys are having to go to the front line because there is no trust in local subordinate commanders. It's a very top heavy command and control structure. So when something goes wrong, these guys have to move themselves almost in the same way they did during any kind of historical war, that from Napoleonic wars up higher. If you need a general to lead the charge, he's got to get out there and lead the charge. There's not that small unit leadership that can, when your leader is gone, your company commander is gone, is down, your platoon leader is gone. Right. You've got NCOs that will pick up and just take on the fight and keep going regardless. That is very rare in other armies, especially the Russian army. And so when you find, the situation, that the second goal that they had to achieve was they also wanted to demonstrate that they could fight on par with the United States and the West. They could move into this country. They could use their advanced technology and advanced weaponry to take the Ukrainian cities and and overrun the city as quickly as possible. And that's why you saw such a very complex plan of 4 primary axes of approach going into the country, coming in from the east, coming down from the north, coming in through Belarus. It was too complicated for their both command and control, and it was too complicated for the logistics tail to be able to keep up with after the first couple of days. As soon as they met resistance, the entire thing fell apart. So that's really one of those pieces. And so once you fail at fighting like the Americans do, the natural thing was that they then had to revert to fighting in the old Soviet style. And that is a really brutal, nasty, world destroying type of a thing. And there's so many historical examples on it. I mean, I remember touring Berlin with my wife in '93 after the Berlin Wall went down. I was visiting a friend of mine who was an S2 up with the Berlin Brigade. And we're just driving through certain areas. He said, "Hey, you see this big avenue here in Berlin?" Yeah. I said, "Yeah, well, yeah, this is, nice broad avenue." He goes, "Yeah, the Russians threw an entire corps down this one street, 21,000 guys to take this one avenue." That's how they fought at the end of World War II, just to overwhelm the Germans with the amount of forces and the amount of firepower that they had. The same thing is happening now.
Yeah, I'm just. We've had some great comments, and so I'm just. Those too, because these guys are. They're talking about investigating some of these Russian oligarchs that are getting killed, and as part of this fight, there is these other levels of war. I wanted to back up to fighting like the Americans. One of the things, and look, this is common knowledge for us military guys, but this is not common knowledge outside of. None of this is sexy, but we move stuff better than any military has ever moved things. Right?
Absolutely.
And I know you know this, but there's different, what they're called, this is for the audience, there's classes of provisions, right? And it's not rank order, but it kind of is. Right. And so like class 1 is like food, right? Yeah. These are like the most basic thing. You have to feed your troops. Class 2 is uniforms, like boots, pants, stuff to protect you from the elements. Class 3, right? You get how important these things are, is petroleum, lubricants, oils, and the Russians can barely do class 1 through 3, and there are like 10 classes of modern provisioning for a force, and they're struggling to get the very most basic. I promise those Russian soldiers are not fighting on full stomachs.
Right. Well, and that's you heard all those. It was just pounded on the media about this 40-mile long column that was ready to strike at the heart of Kiev, and as soon as it started to move out, that was it. That was going to be the end. And as soon as I heard the 40-mile long column, I said, there is no way they're going to get that thing on the road in any concerted or coordinated effort. I said, just think about, even while it's just sitting there, it's burning fuel, it's burning food, it's, I was already getting reports of reading, and this was both from sources that I know, and as well as the media, that they were already going into grocery stores and ransacking the places and looting the places for food, again, essentially foraging from the field
Yeah.
like any kind of 19th century army would do.
Right.
You
I
know,
see a
and
cow.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's So that's
I'm
that
going
was
to the oldie.
that was the first thing. And so if you really want to get, and that's why I keep telling everybody, you really want to understand the Russian and the Soviet way of war, you got to look at so many historical examples. And just for the Americans, if you want to get an idea of how the Americans fight, we've established some precedents just since World War II. There's a great biography from a German Corps commander named Hans von Luke that wrote his biography after the war. And he said, when we made our breakout at the Battle of the Bulge, December 1944, I knew the war was over once we had made our first breakthrough and our first tanks had reached the American supply depots, and they filled up their tanks full of fuel. They grabbed a bunch of food, whatever they could, and then they continued on to the west. And they said, but the problem was the supply depot never ended. It just went into the next one and the next one. And he said he knew the war like this is what the Americans had abandoned because it wasn't that important. And he said, and the other thing that was brought up is when they were getting their first reports back, they broke into what they thought was a supply truck, and it was a mail truck. And so they were breaking into the mail that was being sent to the Americans in the field. And this is, again, through the Red Ball Express, another logistical feat. They weren't finding the same things that the Germans were getting in their mail, like bread and meat and things like that. They were getting nylons, chocolate, Life magazines, luxury items. That's what was being sent to them.
Yeah.
And so that's when they knew it's like, that's what the priority for these guys are. They're living so well. They're eating so well. They're okay with abandoning this because they got more coming. They got so much. The logistics tale is amazing. That the Americans made somewhere in 1940 made something like 3.5 million automobiles in the U.S. Once we got into the war, they made 385 or something like that throughout the rest of the war, because the entire auto industry, flipped the switch and started making bombers and tanks and ships and everything else. That's how that industry that could do that could flip like that. And that's that's when the Germans knew it's like, look, there's no way we can beat these guys. Look, the same thing. Now go back into Ukraine. How can the Russians take over a country that has this massive logistics tail going out the west side of it into the rest of Western Europe? Oh, by the way, a bunch of capitalist countries that are made to do this kind of work.
Right.
I just read another story about it's either a Polish or a Czech company is now cranking out barricades that they're 3D printing and sending over the border for these guys. I mean, they're getting these kind of, and it's not just food and water and and first aid. It's advanced weaponry that's coming across. You can never defeat a military unless you can get rid of the logistics tail that's feeding it. We found that in Vietnam. You find out the same thing in a lot of different historical examples.
Yeah, it's you're making fantastic points. It's hard to Ukraine is always crying for more weapons and everything, but they are getting it. Like it's not like it's out. Like it happens. May not happen as fast as they want. Maybe they want it sooner, but it's going to be hell. And by the way, there's not been a counter offensive, which at some point there will be a counter offensive, and they will get a hold of weapons that they can point at St. Petersburg or Moscow, and these places aren't that far away.
Right.
I mean, if they're any kind of fighting force, they've got some counterintel and some intel people inserting themselves into Russia, and it gets really nasty really fast for Russia. Is there I know that they're focusing right now in the east because obviously the Kiev offensive isn't going to work, so they're gonna focus in the east where it's a little closer, a little easier.
Right.
But even then, the atrocities are stacking up. True or not, doesn't matter. And it's going to be harder and harder for Russia to do anything. And Russia and Putin is walking on a very thin line. If he steps 1 foot over, here comes Title V. That NATO fist will ball up, and that's the last thing he wants. Because I don't know if you know that. I know you know this. I don't know if you know this, but there are still NATO offices in Bosnia. They're never leaving. So they'll always be in Ukraine, and that'll just be one more thing to pester Russia from now on, because so they can't overstep, and that's why I think the nuclear thing's off the table. But it's such a problem for them to try to get out of this. How do we the big question is how do we build a tolerable off ramp? Because that'll be expensive no matter what it
Right.
is. And if we
Right.
don't build it well, it'll be another conflict.
Right. And that's the thing is you got to look at what the Russian objectives are. And it's always been to rebuild that buffer zone that was lost when the Warsaw Pact fell apart. I mean, they were relying upon East Germany, Poland, Hungary, then Czechoslovakia, Romania, all these countries that were part of the Warsaw Pact. Well, they went away. And to make it even worse, some of them started joining NATO.
Yeah.
And then to make it worse, now the Ukrainians we're talking the same thing, and they had some very anti-Russian leadership. That's there was the poisoning incidents. I can't remember the guy's name. Assassination attempt. So when they moved in 2014, that was really a first step to rebuilding that buffer zone in the Donbass region. This one, I think while their initial goal was let's just take the whole country and make it like a Russian stooge like Belarus, is like then we'll have the entire country to at least have that as a buffer zone. But this consolation prize is, well, we're not going to be able to take the whole country. We just don't have the wherewithal to be able to defeat a force like that. So let's concentrate on the East, and we'll at least have the East as a buffer zone with the the Donbass region and the Crimea, and more importantly is a land bridge between the Crimea and Russia proper. And so that's they can still declare victory by going back and saying to their they've already got the I don't know if the whole line is we're fighting against these fascists. So they're trying to stoke the image that Western Europe was, we didn't defeat the Nazis and the fascists, we were co-opted by them, and so now Ukraine is full of fascists or whatever. It's just it's even in American political discourse, God, I can't remember, there's a term for it. It's like, how fast can you start mentioning Hitler and the Nazis and applying that to your political adversary before you get there's actually a term for that. What's the time involved? So this it's kind of the same thing. And so what they can do is they need some sort of off ramp, and I think that right now, just to get this war a ceasefire in place, that there may be a way to give them that off ramp that says, so they can go back and say, well, you know what, we did what we wanted to do. That the whole Kyiv invasion force was really the secondary effort or a feint, and we did what we set out to do. Is we created that buffer zone in eastern Ukraine to to stave off the fascists from invading mommy and popsky Russian families or whatever. You can twist it and turn it and build some sort of messaging from there to say, look, I actually achieved victory in this thing. It did cost some lives. It costed cost everything. But then they can go. Putin still has fairly high ratings within the Russians. They were extremely high. He was up into the Stalin level in 2014 when they did invade, because he did what he said he was going to do. He's going to create that buffer zone, and he did it. The only problem now, and this is much longer term, is like you can declare victory and get out, but you are now the pariah of the world for the next generation until you're gone, until you're either you've either passed away from old age or you're out of office. And they do same thing they did to Gorbachev, same thing they did to Khrushchev, where you get a knock on the door with 5 guys standing around and it says, hey, you're going on vacation for forever, and we're going to put you in this little resort down in Yalta, or we're going to put you in a nice little cottage, and but you're no longer in charge. I mean, that's there's a lot of different ways that can happen. The big thing to look at is, can we do that without this nemesis of a nuclear trigger or a huge expansion of the war then ticking off?
We have to also keep in mind that these things take time and they don't work on what would be a sane timeline, right? So this conflict might stay warm. It might go low intensity. I mean, look, for all of the crying and all of the blue and yellow flags and people's social media things, I don't see the same kind of adoration and lamenting over the Palestinian-Israeli conflict or the Yemen conflict or the Myanmar conflict. I mean, these are people dying all over the world in conflict where
Right.
being subjugated or killed by one group from another. You know about ethnic
Yeah.
violence? Oh my God, you can go to Burma and we
Right.
wouldn't be able to even tell the difference ethnically because we're like, well, these are all
Yeah.
people of color.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, you
Well,
know,
it's just like, Rwanda in the 90s. It's like nobody, I don't know anybody that could tell the difference between a Hutu and a Tutsi, but
yeah,
it was
right.
enough for them to hack each other to death to the tune of 600,000 people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's when I hear anything about race problems here in the U.S., that's go overseas. That's nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, we
Go
experienced
somewhere where it
firsthand.
actually is bad.
Yeah,
So,
it's like wait till you run into a Bosniak versus a Serb. I
yeah.
mean, these
Yeah.
guys were ready to. I mean, God, they performed genocide. They erased entire
Yeah.
towns. I remember driving through them with you.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh,
it's just like, and you couldn't even go into the towns because every house was mined. It wasn't like you
yeah.
could just
That
go in
was,
there and pillage. It's
yeah.
like, no, don't even go near it. That's a settlement. No, don't even go near it because every
Yeah.
house has a booby trap or whatever on it. That's
People don't understand how dangerous, and this goes right to this conflict, how dangerous it is to move around the battlefield, even if there's not a hot engagement,
oh yeah,
because you just don't know where the next
right,
thing was left for you, whoever comes
right,
next, So you're the peacemaker. You're going to come into this town. It's like the next guy that opens this door, the next Serb that opens this door is going to get blown up. You're like, I'm not
yeah,
Serbian, but you don't know
right,
that because the bomb
yeah,
is there. The other thing is we have the back to the time thing. You look at like the battle over the Sinai, and
hmm
how long that took to calm that Egyptian
hmm
Israeli conflict down. These things move at their own pace. You have to have the right people in office. Look, the guy in office right now, not going to be able to handle this. He's not proven worthy of that trust. And that's just a career long failure, right? So whoever the next guy is, hopefully they can help to stabilize this region. If it's even our business to do this, it's
right,
certainly not the Germans
right.
because they're too conflicted on what to do. So when you look at the world and trying to walk our way out of this in a way that makes sense, and so that we don't have 35 years of conflict in the
Yeah.
Ukrainian Russian era, is there any world leader that you look at and go, this person probably could get us there, retired or otherwise?
It's I hate to say this, but outside of the U.S., a lot of folks are waiting on those leaders to emerge, and you may have like Zelensky is a great leader in terms of a battlefield leader or a wartime leader, but this is what happened during the Arab Spring. Is
Yeah,
you saw a lot of media reports or analysts were saying this is going to be great. This is going to change the entire the backwards looking face of the Maghreb Arab world. And the problem is you don't realize how rare the American experience was. There are no Thomas Jeffersons and John Adams, that are sitting out there ready to serve as that guiding light and provide. We're the one of the oldest governments in the
yeah,
world right now. You could
if
say
not the old,
we're
right?
one of the youngest countries, but we're still one of the oldest governments. Why? Because our government is based upon a piece of paper, not upon a person, not upon a personality or something like that. If you know, and we have mechanisms to change that. And that's a lot of folks. You say, well, there's no such thing as American exceptionalism. That's American exceptionalism right there.
Yeah,
Just the foundations and on why we're built. Now go, take a look at the Russians. They've had changes of government several times
yeah,
since then. In fact, the Americans as a Western way of life, we've had terrorism problems. You go into the Middle East, like when the Palestinians were very frustrated with the performance of the Arab countries and being able to conquer Israel. You realize that all the time in the 80s and the 90s and even in the 2000s, the Russians really never had much of a problem with terrorism. And one of the examples I always give is like 1985. There was a Palestinian Islamic group that took some Russians prisoners. Said, we demand, one of our leaders is sent from your prison, sent back to us. And the Soviets were like, yeah, not a problem. They cut this guy's genitals off or pieces of his bodies off, mailed it back to him, and says, here's your guy. And
yeah,
then they shot and executed the guy. So it's like, you can't out terror us. The terrorists are running the country. And
yeah,
even today, when somebody says, describe, the thought process of Putin and the oligarchs, it's like, take an episode of The Sopranos and put them in charge of a national government.
yeah.
That's, how do you make a model from that? It is extremely personality driven, personal connections, changes from year to year, who's in favor, who's out of favor. Whereas we are still bound by some, rules of, constitutional formats, even in other Western countries that have adopted a parliamentary system, at least they are beholden to that. So it's not the rule of who's ever got the greatest idea. It's, you have to stick to the rule of law, and that's the most important piece.
One of the things we lose track of here in America when we're hard on ourselves, and it's good to be hard on yourself, it's good to have rigor and everything,
Yeah,
is
of
that
course.
we have 3 founding documents that protect 3 specific freedoms. We have national freedom, political freedom, and personal freedom, all defended by. And that's exceptionally rare. That there are very few places, governments in the earth that have that, and so it does provide us and isolates those freedoms. No one else can come in. The Declaration of Independence is us saying, as a nation, we are free. So leave us alone, and we can go on from there. I can't. That is so rare to have that. I had to say that one more time.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
When we look at this Russian-Ukrainian conflict, these things again have long tails. They just don't want to go away.
Right.
And by the way, the Poles are absolutely ready for a fight. I mean, they absolutely take on Russia and likely would whoop Russia bad at this point. So escalation is still in play.
Right. Well, I mean, how did we get involved in the Spanish-American War? It was a whipped up populace based upon the papers. William Randolph Hearst was one of the biggest pieces. I think one of the quotes from that start of that war was, "You provide me the headlines, I'll provide you the war."
Yeah.
And that's, and that's the same thing. Is like when there's a lot of times, I keep telling neighbors that are getting stressed out about this, is like, shut it off. You got to shut the news off and take a look at it from and that's why I said it's easier for me to go read, reread something about on history from that perspective, because you're always going to find patterns. I mean, look what happened when this is a great example, is when we did train with the Ukrainian army, and I was standing with my commander, Colonel Doug Tystead, and we're looking at the map of the training area, and you could see this training area. You can still see it on Google Earth now. You can see this wooded area that they cut into in order to make a maneuver training area for a motorized rifle regiment. You could see where the regiment was in battalion columns. You could see the trails on the map where they broke into company columns. It was the same drill that they did over and over and over again, the same play. And my commander sitting there next to me, he goes, "Hey, so what do you see?" He calls me Deuce. And, hey, Deuce, what do you see when you look at this map? And what he wanted me to make sure is, did I notice this pattern? And they've done it so many times that the trails made it onto the map. And so, and when I told him, I was like, you know what I'm seeing this is like, you know how us Americans, we will adapt our fighting to fit the terrain. What the Russian Soviet model is that they will adapt the terrain to fit their fighting style or fit their tactics. And so when you move into Kyiv and you move into, I think, Mariupol really ceased to exist as a city, because you've got a problem with defenders in the city. No problem. Let's just destroy the city. Then we won't have to worry about it. And they did it in Berlin. They did it in Afghanistan, where if they received any resistance from a town, they'd surround the town with vehicles and assault helicopters and just wipe out the entire town and raze it.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about, the populace. You don't have to win any hearts and minds when there's no hearts left beating. That's the way. That's kind of what they're doing now in the East. Their recon forces are getting beat up, or they're getting destroyed as they're trying to do their traditional reconnaissance of sending in their, combat reconnaissance patrols or their recon companies. They're getting shot up, so the tanks are going in blind. So now they've pulled the tanks back, and they're almost purely relying upon massive amounts of artillery. And it's not necessarily to say, well, we're going to do some pinpoint strikes and take out this command post. No, we're just going to take out the entire block and everything in it, and then we don't have to worry about that part of the town. And you're going to see more of that. That's why this is really the saddest part. Is it's just turning into a disgusting grinder, a slugfest in the eastern part. And for having Americans go into that, you're asking for a massive amount of loss of life on our side, as well as the continued loss of Ukrainians and Russians. And what are we doing? We're risking nuclear war and a huge expansion of that war, and I know it's like, well, is that in our national interest, but is that the moral thing to do? There are limits to what Americans should do, no matter all the things that we've already talked about. There are still limits to what we can do to help the rest of the world.
Yeah, there are limits. If you had a position of authority with the United States government, administration capability and people aside, what would be your advice to whoever is sitting at the helm of the United States government?
I honestly would have to look at it with a much more longer term focus. It's not just, I know the American tradition is we don't start any wars, but when we do get involved, we rush in with overwhelming force. We do it quickly and we get out.
Yeah.
This conflict is not going to let you do that. So you have to approach it more on the from how we did the Cold War. We didn't get involved directly with the uprising in Hungary. We didn't get involved directly with the other uprisings like in Poland and with Lech Wałęsa and the illegal. Then it was an illegal labor union that he had stood up. What we did is we positioned ourselves for the long haul of freeing these countries and instilling liberty and freedom, but you can't do that overnight. And that's the part, is we have to restrain ourselves and look at it from a much more longer term strategic focus. Because I can tell you who is doing that is the Chinese. They look at things from a very long focus, where we're looking at stuff as what's going to make the headlines and what's going to make the reporters get off my back that we're doing something.
Yeah, I got to fix these poll numbers.
Yeah.
Check for everybody.
Right. Or just like you have to show progress and you have to do something. It's like, yeah, but we are, you can say we're doing something, but we no longer have trust in the media to say the the right story, that look, this is going to take a long time. This is going to take a full spectrum effort. And that's why the new emerging military doctrine is called multi-domain operations. It's not just the battlefield. It's the entire social media environment. It's the information environment. It's economic warfare, diplomatic warfare. There's all kinds of things that are involved in. You have to fight on every level with overwhelming force. The battlefield is only one small part.
With professional capability too. This is one of my big things.
Right.
There are elements to modern war now, and you have to have a mastery of these elements: is social, cultural, political, religious, obviously military, but materiel within military. Right. There's these other sub elements, and if you don't master these things, you lose. And that's why we lost in Afghanistan. That's why we lost in Iraq. And then you hear it in like our peers who are longing for tank on tank fights. And also say things like, see, the Ukrainians, they fight for their country, not like those weak-minded or, lack of bravery Afghans. You couldn't have more obviously stated that you have no idea what modern conflict is like. You're talking about things. Your admiration for Ukraine's way of fighting has nothing to do with modern conflict. It's just the Afghans fight the way the Afghans fight because of the way Afghans operate, and they survive in what would kill Americans otherwise.
Right. Well, the Afghans have been fighting like that since the British moved in the late 1800s, 1880s. It's the same model. It's like, look, it's not like we can defeat you. It's we can outlast you.
Yeah.
You're thousands of miles away from home, and this is our backyard. We can suck it up, keep our heads down, and eventually you have to leave. Same thing with the Soviets, same thing with the Americans. It's a very long haul war. When you go into these places, and again, with the Russians, once you see where they're coming from, it's like they will never lose that drive to create to have their own security buffer zone. I'm not saying it's right. But that is never going to go away, and they're not just going to learn their lesson in Ukraine, as tenacious as the Ukrainian fighters are. And again, that should be a warning to anybody that's looking to do any kind of aggression, I don't know, towards Taiwan. You can try to invade, but you're going to risk becoming the pariah of the world in short order. And so the Europeans are now reevaluating their entire economic model on, do we really want to rely upon these guys? And quite honestly, the Chinese are risking that as the manufacturers of so many different sectors. That was the warning bell was when Trump came out and just said, we need to disassociate ourselves with a lot of these ways that we've tied ourselves economically to a country who, quite honestly, does not consider us their friend. In fact, they consider us their either competitor or their adversary. And so that's the kind of thing that now has to be weighed. It's like, yeah, we could take Taiwan. We'd lose a lot, how many hundreds of, tens of thousands of people and equipment and everything else. But do we really want to risk the next generation of destroying ourselves economically in the process? Because look at what the Russians are doing, and they're teaching a great lesson to the Chinese are taking notes. They're taking notes from a tactical standpoint on we need to relook at our relook at our entire way we do logistics, because obviously that failed. We need to take a look at how we do small unit leadership, because that's failing. But now you need to look at, we need to look at how do we sustain ourselves for economically after being, showing ourselves to be the thugs of the world for such a long time. And quite honestly, it's really made a lot of folks who are just rubbing their hands that have been studying the Soviets for so long, like, oh boy, we can finally go toe to toe with these guys like we wanted to. It's a different world now.
It's a different world for sure. And the war we want is war because who'd want to fight us toe to toe? This is the thing that we got to understand. Like they don't want to do that, right? So a couple questions. One, does Taiwan even matter to us? More importantly, today it appears that there will be a massive flipping of the House, the Senate, and then following on probably the presidency, because it's hard to recover once you're this far down the hole. So do we in the next 4 years see B2s running missions? Like, look, we picked a side in the Bosnian conflict, right? We easily could have picked the Serbs. They were the bad guys, and that's how history is. But we all know that the Balkan history is a complex history, and to just pick one side, you're going to pick the wrong side no matter what side you pick. So do you see us dropping ordnance on oil fields or some other strategic but non-populated target? I mean, I think it's a non-zero likelihood. Like, it's something above. I would say 20%. Things.
You mean for what, as a preemptive measure, or as
retaliatory, preemptive, whatever? Like, hey, we need to end this thing. Here's some pressure in some form or fashion.
There has to be I would say there has to be an entire relook at what does preemptive or what does deterrence actually mean now? Because obviously it didn't work with the Russians. And it used to be the MAD principle, mutually assured destruction. That was going to keep us, and which has, by the way, that has worked over the years. So we need to relook at all of that. I think it's for decades. I'm not sure if they're still in this posture, but like the Japanese, they're restricted by their constitution of not spending more than 1% of their annual budget on their defense.
Right.
I think after this, there's going to be a lot of countries. I don't know, the Finns, the Swedes, the Poles, like, look, we need to quit living off the U.S. as a defensive umbrella like we have been over the years. And even the U.S. has been promoting that. It's time for us to put on our big boy pants and say, look, we need to rely upon ourselves. We can't rely upon somebody else coming in at the last minute, or U.S. nuclear weapons as a threat to not invade this country, because it's not going to work. I mean, there's even I even remember that it's an anecdotal piece, but it's a Chinese diplomat talking to an American general, and I think one of the things he said was like, the Americans would never trade a nuclear missile strike on L.A. or San Francisco for Taiwan. And as soon as I answered that, it's like, once you cross that threshold, it's like, I don't think the Chinese, whoever said that, I don't think this guy understood that the United States would never trade San Francisco or LA for the destruction of your entire country and the rest of the world, which is what would happen. I mean, as once you tip that scale, there's no rules for that. So there has to be, again, I know there's lots of smart guys that are working up in national think tanks. I think One of the guys that I really love is General Jack Keane, and he's on the news regularly often, and he's given out pretty much the best assessments on anything that's been going on in Russia and Ukraine right now. And I had the honor of meeting him when I was still on active duty, and he was a great guy to talk to and listen to and just get to know. His assessment has been probably the most sound that I've seen so far.
The war escalates in this case, and the government comes to Erik Kleinsmith and they say, Erik, we need you back. We're going to make you we're going to frock you to 06 Colonel. You need to build an intel asset that we can push out and start to work this problem. What one, do you say yes? And two, how do you array your brigade?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, there's so many pieces that you're not covering. I mean, like, what's the mission? What's the purpose? Who are they supporting? Intel doesn't do anything without supporting somebody. And that's all right. That's one of the biggest things. Is like, it's the first line of my book. Intelligence is for the customer. It's like, it doesn't matter what we do, unless you're supporting somebody, that's what you need to do. So when you're building an intel capability, whether it's a unit you're sending out, whether it's a mix of humaners or SIGINT folks, it's, who are we supporting? What's the organization? Is it U.S. forces? Is it Ukrainian forces? Is it,
it's the USARA commander in support of the NATO commander.
Well, last time I checked, he's got an apparatus that works. I mean, that's the thing. It's just really more of a shifting of priorities rather than pushing out new capabilities. I mean, there are new capabilities that are coming out all the time, but it's that kind of a piece. And again, we've learned a lot of lessons from our own Cold War, where you've got a lot of folks before 9/11, a lot of national level agencies were focused on national level decision makers, and all of a sudden after 9/11,
that's true. Yeah.
They started retooling themselves. Like, look, our customers are actually the ones with muddy boots. We need to refocus on those war fighters and push that down. It's like, there's the whole concept of you have an intel organization called the self-licking ice cream cone, when the only reason they exist is to provide themselves with their own analysis. It doesn't work like that. And I've been in a couple of organizations that were like that to a degree. So there's a lot of different things that you would have to do looking forward for intel. But I'm telling you that the most important piece for this conflict, and then relooking at the entire world, this invasion has really changed the model on how we need to look at future warfare. And it's not the way we're fighting it now, or not. Yeah. It's not the way we think we're going to fight it now. We're always preparing for the last war. The cyber arena is going to be huge.
Yeah. Well, and every unit has independent reporters in it all over the place. Everything is said, is recorded, everything done is videoed, everything. And that can all be used against you. I know of a commander who it's an infantry commander, ordered a troop to fire a round at another vehicle, and that troop said no, and it stood. It stood. So I don't want to give too many scenarios like that at all, that's not supposed to happen. If an infantry 05 or above says put a round into that vehicle, that E4 and below, selects it to fire and throws a round at that thing, and damn well better hit it right where he wants to hit it if he's in an infantry battalion, don't you damn miss.
Right.
But that's the world now.
I've heard something similar like that. It's just like, hey, private, you see that building over there? Yes, sir, I can see it. Well, I don't want to see it.
Yeah. Make it go away. Well, I can't do that. There could be people in there.
Right.
That's the point.
Right. That's true.
Yeah. Well, so, okay, we've covered a lot of ground, and I don't want to take all of your time, but it's always fun to talk to you. Do you want to ask me anything? Do you want to bring anything else up? What do you want to do before we close up?
No, I mean, just tell you that I'm going to be giving several talks. There's a great organization that I'm going to next week in Dallas. It's called the International Association for Law Enforcement Intelligence Analysts. There's a sister organization called Law Enforcement Intelligence Unit. They have their annual convention down in Dallas next week. I'm going to be doing that. I'm doing, I think, 4 presentations there on a lot of these topics, from how to put your intel operation together to I do a lot of teaching of threat profiling, threat mapping, of different organizations. A lot of the stuff that we're doing for Able Danger prior to 9/11. it's just,
Right.
this is the kind of thing that keeps, that's this kind of thing that keeps me active. And, this is why I don't golf, that keeps me doing the things I like to do. So it's just, I think, even this show, once we're done with this, let's get together in a couple of months. We can talk the same stuff and have a totally different conversation on both cold cases and what's going on overseas. So,
well, and just to tease one thing that we're talking about doing, we haven't done it yet, but I want to talk about the 165th, the Balkans, and the digital dawn of human collection, because whether folks, and this kind of goes against your thing. One of the things folks have to accept is that the 165th, specifically Delta Company, the counterintelligence / interrogator company, we were the tip of the spear. Like we were the chrome on the tip of it, because without us doing that, because there was no combat action that was going to happen. I mean, without us, that mission doesn't work. And and for some damn reason, we were able to succeed.
I was told several times while we were downrange that what we were doing, our agents and our interrogators out in the field were, quote, the only game in town. So no matter how, what you had for any kind of, overhead technical assets or whatever. And I write that in my book, is like sometime in the late 90s, early 2000s, that America fell in love with technology, or military intelligence fell in love with technology. And we've kind of disregarded the skills and the capabilities that, no kidding, old school interrogators and old school counterintel agents and human, collectors, folks on the ground doing the money boots thing, we kind of disregarded that. It's like, we don't need that. We have satellites now. It's like, but you're not able to get into the thought process of this local leader. You're not able to understand that footprint. And the military learned their lesson. It was kind of a peace dividend thing, where it's like, let's get rid of all the interrogation units. And then after Abu Ghraib, they said, hey, you know what? We need to bring a bunch of interrogation units back together and get them trained up. That's what, the U.S. Army is already learned that lesson 10, 20 years ago, and they're reworking that. So that's, again, we're going to learn a bunch of new lessons from this one as well.
I would say that we've been offered that lesson. I don't know that we've learned it, because when I see the quality of our human collectors, and I'm speaking as one, the quality isn't there because we don't focus on those professional skills. We try to, but we're not very good at it. And we also allow too much willy-nilly engagement with locals by people who are not experts.
Right.
Just because you're a commander doesn't make you an expert on human engagement. Might make you an expert on tank combat, but in this fight, you're subordinate to me and my ability after having 1,000 combat missions. I've talked to a lot of people. You're going to have to learn from me before you go out and talk to someone and engage them in a way that's going to have any kind of tactical connection to the strategic goals. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, the problem with any kind of human collectors on the ground in any area is, one, is too slow. I mean, and compared, to what we're used to with like I can get better stuff from CNN, Fox News, or whatever. And the other thing is it's deemed as too risky. Wait, we're putting our people out there in harm's way. We're sending this guy into a meeting with the mayor with a bunch of thugs that are his bodyguards. And do we really want to do that? Or do we just want to rely upon the internet, to do that a much more sanitary way? And so there's, those are the kind of things that we have to you have to grapple with and figure out how do we, and the other thing is, like, if you're moving into an area, it's not that that these human guys can go out and the next day can start giving you some really great stuff.
God. Yeah. It takes forever.
It's weeks to months before something great comes out of it. So that's, if you're moving in and you don't have your guys that have already been in there for, for a week, couple weeks and months, they're already too late. And that's the thing, is there's a lot of drawbacks in how there's actually a part of my book that I talk about that. Like, there's different types of intel, and some of them are great for hard targeting, and some of them are like the humaners, like you really need them for a totally different type of collection that you're looking for.
Well, there's gardeners next door, so let me shut this thing down.
Yeah, no problem.
Too annoying. All right, stand by 1 sec while I shut this down. Thanks everybody for watching. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much.